His biggest cycle ever that he's done to date was a titration of deca up to What's up guys, Derek, moreplates.com. Today we're going to be talking about low dose gear. This is a conversation that's been getting more hype lately, especially in the take your 500 milligrams and shut the fuck up crew. This is something that is definitely a debatable topic in that if you're going to shut yourself down, should it not just be for a dose that is more than satisfactory to provide enough benefit and bang for the buck, given that you are shutting down your HPTA? And yeah, you know, there's definitely a case to be made for, using enough to actually reap the rewards of the exposure without, pushing the envelope too aggressively to where you're in side effect territory, but as well as not going too low where you're essentially just replacing your hormones. Now, again, I've never said your cycle should be, 200 milligrams or it should be this or it should be that. I just, have made statements before about, in general, the lowest effective dose for your individual goals are what make the most sense. If you are an individual who does not need 500 milligrams, 700 milligrams, 1,000 milligrams, 1,500 milligrams, are you going to take it just for the sake of there was a graded dose response study and people had well-tolerated outcomes at a certain dosage threshold, despite the fact that for your sport or for your physique development endeavors or for your whatever, you could get away with less? Like, the lowest effective dose makes the most fucking sense to me, and titrating up accordingly based upon goals and biomarkers and response / side effects, etc. Organ health, basic fucking shit. So anyways, the thing I wanted to really highlight is the fact that a lot of people seem to think that guys with sick physiques, it's impossible to make any progress on anything essentially less than like 500 milligrams, or, even the best looking guys, they all must be doing a gram. They must be doing 1,500 milligrams. At the end of the day, if a guy looks sick, he must be doing a fuck ton of shit. And I don't think people who don't have good genetics can really wrap their head around what genetics can really do. And I wanted to bring a very good example to the light of an individual who's not necessarily a hyper responder to gear, but an example of an individual who's a reasonable responder, maybe like above average, but has amazing baseline natty genetics. So again, I've always mentioned before how there are differences in individuals who have great natural potential and there are individuals who have great enhanced potential. And sometimes those overlap where you have the natties who look like phenoms as natties, fucking like Ronnie Coleman, and they take gear and they also hyper respond to that and they become Mr. Olympia. Then there's some individuals who don't really look like anything before they touch gear and they don't even have very good natural physiques, and they take gear and boom, they turn into fucking monsters. And then again, you have individuals with incredible natural genetics too, and they take gear and they have mediocre response or slightly above average. And in general, those individuals, aren't going to be open bodybuilders, but they may end up being competitive, like men's physique competitors or classic physique competitors in some cases too. Obviously, depending on the individual, the response, this is all a sliding scale. Obviously, I'm just giving a general guideline here of there are individuals who have the spectrum of good genetics as a natural, 0 to 100, whatever it is. On the opposite side, there is also a sliding spectrum, 0 to 100 of hormone response. And then obviously the genetic components of fucking structure, muscle belly inserts, stuff like that, a whole nother separate thing from both of those two factors. So anyways, a good individual I thought to bring attention to is James English. He's a young 21-year-old guy who is openly enhanced. This is a guy who has clearly developed his physique to pretty incredible levels in the past couple of years. This is what he looks like right now. Here he is standing in, in front of the gym here. Looks like Alpha Elite Gym. Looking like a goddamn motherfucking meat stick and a half. What ethnicity are you again? ... So he's on Milano tan. That is why he looks so tanned. And he also just went on vacation. Guy gets back from an all-inclusive vacation is sub 7%. What the fuck? Bro, when did you get this grainy? What the fuck? Myron so hard. Caramel James. So I think we can all accept and acknowledge this guy looks fucking ridiculous. This guy is a physique all of us would be happy to have, and this could very well be a competitive physique on a, classic physique or, men's physique stage in the future. He wants to compete in classic as far as I know. But again, the genetic response for hyper responding to gear isn't necessarily there to become a top open competitor. Maybe years down the line of grinding and fucking packing on, 5 to 10 pounds of tissue a year, but the guy is also a very motivated entrepreneur. He's not a guy that I necessarily think is going to push the envelope to the limits of trying to get to, fucking 240 pounds lean, 250 lean to look like that. Like, I think he is going to hover around classic physique territory, and he seems to be well on his way to developing a physique that I think could be competitive at a high level. His structure's fucking sick. He's very well-rounded. And again, very young with a lot of fucking potential, and his lifts are really, really good too. He's a very, very strong guy. And again, people will be shocked when they hear what he fucking uses, because again, some people just can't wrap their head around the fact that some individuals just, respond well to low doses and don't necessarily need more shit. Just because a guy needs 500 milligrams of test to respond in any capacity whatsoever, it doesn't mean that somebody else could not be using literally 200 milligrams of shit and fucking blow them out of the water. And I'm not saying you should do 200 milligrams. I'm not saying any of that. That just happens to be what this guy is doing right now. And again, it's not even really based on, it's not even coming down to my recommendation necessarily. It's literally what he's been imposed upon by his own genetics too. Because again, genetic response also comes down to things like aromatization, things like gynosensitivity, things like hair loss. How willing are you to tolerate those side effects in order to reap the rewards of whatever dosage exposure you want to do? The teeter-totter of fucking, pros and cons to things. So for James, he's actually incredibly gyno prone to the point that he cannot even run more than 100 milligrams of test. Like, he was on TRT to start, 200 milligrams of test, which is, pretty fucking hefty TRT dose. Obviously, not really TRT at the end of the day. He knows that, but, that's just, sports TRT, whatever the fuck. That was too much. He was starting to get gyno sensitivity. Even administering on a very frequent basis, he had to taper it down. He had to implement things like DIM and calcium D-glucarate just to fucking handle even a, high normal level of test, even once he started to peel it, take it back a notch as far as the dosage exposure. And we're gonna be getting into what his cycles have been to get to where he's at now relative to where he was when he started as a peak natty. This is what he was as a peak natty here. You can see him here. Obviously a fucking good physique still, This is better than what some guys are gonna look like enhanced. Here's another shot. This is back in, I don't know. It wasn't actually 2018, I don't think. Maybe this was a throwback. Actually, I don't know, fuck. Maybe it was. I guess the kid, he was only like a 17-year-old kid at the time or some shit. Here he is, gains of return with a, how do I even describe this fucking emoji here? Mask with a fucking Pinocchio nose, Spanish devil. I don't fucking know. I don't know what I'm looking at. This is, all right, so this is actually him pre-anabolic exposure. So this is actually after multiple very, very intermittent runs with, pro hormones and shit too. So this is actually not totally natty. Like this was like the peak natty shit. And then moving to, this was pre-TRT, TRT. And then, cycles thereafter. Only 2 actually, but we're gonna get into that. So this is what his back looked like, and you saw the front. And here is some posing footage so you can get an idea of what the physique was before. So obviously, not bad at all, dude. Like, this is very, very fucking good. And at this point, he has done, random intermittent bursts of MK677 to boost his appetite, get a bit of intramuscular fullness. He's done random 2-week bursts of pro hormones to go to events and shit. He knows it wasn't ideal. He knows it contributed to his gyno. He's not happy about it. There's no need to critique the fucking decisions of a 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid or whatever it was. He knows better. And that is, the process of learning. We all did dumb shit when we were younger. And it's good that good information is available now so people can do better, strategies moving forward and not do, spend less years doing that stuff, or ideally 0 years doing that stuff entirely. Because again, most of us weren't that lucky to have, proper information out there and proper, highly informative, content being put out on the internet. Back then, we are relying heavily on, forums that are you know, the best information we had at the time. We had, you know, the local gym bros who were, you know, fucking selling you your UGL shit. That kind of stuff was the sources of information, and it ended up with a lot of Debo-only cycle gangsters, you know, people using shitty pro hormones like M1Ts from your local supplement store, fucking GNC, crazy shit back in the day. So these individuals who are in their, you know, highly aspiring to build impressive physiques in their early 20s are very, very fortunate, in my opinion, to be in this era where they have the information available about how to prevent cardiac remodeling, or at least attenuate it fairly significantly with things like angiotensin receptor blockers, beta blockers, how to, you know, avoid neurotoxicity and cardiotoxicity by unnecessary deploying AIs, how to, you know, choose your compound selection, which ones make the most sense in which situations, should you be using hepatotoxic orals, where does it make sense and why? Like, this kind of shit was not necessarily fleshed out very well, like 10, you know, however many years ago. Even back when we had, you know, the gurus back in the day in like the 90s, whatever, a lot of those guys were highly incentivized by monetary gain, unfortunately. So it led to a lot of promotion, even among the guys who were seen as the top, and they were like incredible fucking genius guys, but they were still incredibly biased in their recommendations of anabolics and whatnot because they were literally fucking selling the shit. So nowadays there's a unique scenario in that, well, I guess some guys probably sell anabolics still, but most guys don't really have, you know, some significant underlying motivations for talking about like which compounds make the most sense to use and like which, you know, diagnostics you should get and shit like that. There's not really a whole lot of like reason to be promoting like, oh, this is why you should use EQ over this or that. It's like, it's not like there's some compound that is, you know, you fucking smuggled a bunch from Mexico and you're trying to like get rid of it, so you're gonna promote it. Like, that's the kind of shit that was going on in the 90s. Unfortunately, it's not really a thing now. There's, you know, a lot of access and a lot of legitimate high quality doctor oversight too for individuals who are actually legitimately hormone deficient too. Obviously, you know, a totally different side of the equation, not really related to the performance enhancement side, but again, there are avenues for individuals to get like, you know, high quality information and or oversight in some scenarios that will help them, you know, make more guided and informed decisions on safer practices. So anyways, you see what his physique was before. His natural potential was obviously fucking, you know, very, very good. He has a great physique objectively by anybody's standards. And then he gets on gear. So let's talk about his first like cycle. You know, it's not really, you know, he was getting on TRT, 200 milligrams a week, you know, high in my opinion. That's what he decided to do. So he did that from July 2020 to November 2020. And he went from 168 pounds at the start of it to 185 pounds by November. So let's kind of like, maybe I can just scroll back on his Instagram. Probably should have had this preloaded ahead of time, but whatever, fuck it. You're gonna go on a journey with me. Here we go. We're going down all the way to last June. It can't be that far. Let's see, here we are in September, getting there. So he is just about to hop on the TRT bandwagon here at this point. All right, here's a picture of him pre-lifting to 2020. So this is, like, even looking at him pre-lifting, dude, like you could see the genetics are fucking there. He's like 2014, so he's like, I don't know, 14 years old here. Like it's fucking insane, dude. 14 years old. He has like a good chest and fucking visible abs already. So anyway, let's see. Here he is in July. So he is basically hopping on TRT around here, and all of a sudden the you know, the fullness starts to pick up a little bit, moving into, where are we here? Oh wait, no, this is still him. Obviously more favorable lighting circumstances. Like this is a pretty fucking good shot here in my opinion. This is still pre-TRT. So anyways, here we go. We get into the actual TRT era. This was July, so he's like basically just hopped on, and he starts to super saturate a little bit and starts to get really full, starts to gain a bit of weight. He ends up peaking out at about 185 pounds apparently by November. So here he is, and he hit a lot of fucking PRs during this time when he was on just starting. This was his first time hitting 405. So the TRT was definitely making a difference. Delts are fucking popping, giving me a run for my money here. Let's see, getting into past, okay, September 18th. getting to October 11th, and we almost getting to November, where the guy is basically embarking on his first cycle. So the first cycle in question ends up being, this is a fucking funny pic here. The first cycle ends up, oh, this is a classic shot too. Sorry. He ends up getting on deca for his first cycle. So this is a bulk that, and by the way, he like lowered the test dose, and he was trying different strategies to mitigate estrogen, pinning more frequently, stuff like that. Going into the blast, he realizes test is not really in the cards for him at a dosage that is going to be useful. So again, logical enough to conclude that it is not that helpful to be using a dose of test that's only like 150 to 200 milligrams for your entire blast phase. So again, there's nothing to be said about graded dose response studies or, super physiological dosages being, required to build significant amounts of tissue. That's definitely the fucking case. And there's definitely no top bodybuilders building their physiques on, a few hundred milligrams of shit. However, you do have individuals who are like this and like the top guys who could still build very, very fucking huge physiques, perhaps within the realms of their goals still, and hitting a minimum effective dose to do so, using reasonable shit. So his biggest cycle ever that he's done to date was a titration of deca up to 500 milligrams, and that was short-lived. The most of the cycle was like 400 milligrams per week, if I recall correctly, based on, let me check my notes here. Yeah, it was. So he is, now again, for his logic here, he's extremely estrogen sensitive. He's hair loss sensitive too, and the testosterone was not something he could really titrate at all. He actually reeled it back to like a minimum base. And it was getting to the point where it, for him, he's so fucking estrogen dominant that he decided he had to pull the test. Like, for me, I would imagine 99.9% of individuals would need a backbone of estrogen. But I guess for him, some situations, some individuals, I don't know if he's gauging that just off of, like you would in general gauge that not just off your gyno, but also like how your dick is working, general functionality, shit like that. Like you would know you're low estrogen if you end up waking up without morning wood anymore. You have no libido. Stuff like this is gonna become pretty apparent if you're not just like again, you should not be doing certain cycles just to avoid gyno. Like that's the kind of thing that can get you into the territory of using unhealthy choices simply to avoid side effects. And I know that's like, for guys who wanna avoid hair loss or gyno or whatever, and you're hyper prone to it, that can put you in an unfortunate situation where you're using less than ideal compound selection in order to avoid a specific side effect. Fortunately for gyno though, that's something you can just get removed and it's gone forever. Whereas for something like hair loss or, potentially acne, like I guess depending on if you want to expose yourself to something aggressive to get rid of the acne and you've already tried all the natural interventions, those things are a bit more difficult to deal with for some people and can heavily influence their compound selection to the point where maybe it's not as ideal. For him, he's a very, very strength-driven individual. He likes to hit PRs. Obviously, it helps drive hypertrophy, to be breaking fucking your record lifts and whatnot, and to be getting more volume in and moving the weights up. And deca is not the most conducive compound to anything except protein expression from what I've seen. Its satellite interactions with androgenic signaling is fucking weak. Like it's very, very, this is why it's so good from a hair loss context, because it like literally 5-alpha reduces into dihydronandrolone, and it has almost no like androgenic drive to a point where you could literally be gaining like pretty significant amounts of size, but be gaining like almost nothing on your fucking lifts. It is, now it's not always the case, but for a lot of individuals, deca monotherapy is a very, very weak compound for gaining strength. And this is where adding in, little things alongside it or having an adequate test base ideally would be advantageous. But again, for James, he's so estrogen sensitive, he's so hair loss sensitive, mainly the estrogen being his concern though. He ran up to 500 mgs per week and he ended up maintaining his gyno actually reduced while he was doing it. It actually got better and he gained a decent amount of size, but his lifts didn't go up much. His bench went up about 10 pounds from 405 to 415. Squat was impossible to gauge because he was injured before deca, but all of his accessories got stronger, and deadlift he PR'd as well. But again, he was eating in a calorie surplus, gained a lot of weight. He went from 185 to about 197 on deca only. And intermittently, about one time per week, he would throw in 25 milligrams Anadrol pre-workout, presumably to try and hit his, bench press PR or whatever it was. But he said, no deca dick worked great, no problems whatsoever in that aspect. Libido was high and gyno shrunk a lot. So for him, you know, this isn't necessarily like the healthiest cycle on paper, but for him, this is what was deemed appropriate for his situation. And again, 500 milligrams, not that fucking much for a guy trying to, push the fucking limits. But again, moving to his next one, like this is the really shocking one. End of April 2021, he decides to switch into a cutting phase and he reintroduces test, but he can only tolerate so much. He's using a literal base of like therapeutic replacement, 80 milligrams. You're gonna produce, I believe it's 3 to 7 milligrams per day with no ester, obviously, free form, through your ball sack if you're a natural. Now, 80 test, after you cleave off the ester, like what are you left with? You're left with like very, very normal looking production, to the point that you're probably walking around with like, fuck, who knows, like a 500 like total, like maybe? Like when I was on, the lowest I went, I believe was 100 mgs of test per week. That was like the lowest I went on my TRT, and that, my total was like 500 or something. My free T was disproportionately higher. It was still in range, but it was in the 20s, whereas my total T was like, mid-range as fuck. So 80 test with a heavier ester, higher molecular weight is going to take up more of the milligram component of the that 80 milligrams, yielding less active hormone at the end of the day. That's like barely fucking replacement, realistically. And then he had 100 tren ace on top of that. So this guy is literally using less than 200 milligrams for his cut, and ended up adding in 2 IU of generic GH per day. He actually started at 60 test and 75 tren to assess his side effects, had no gyno or anything, and decided to taper up. So he tapers up to, the 100 tren ace and 80 test D with the 2 IUs GH, and he ends up getting stronger during that cut. So this is, let me fast forward to April. Where are we at here? We're at April 1st. So he ends up, this was the converted melanin to muscle mass. Cut is about to be insane. So this is the bulk. And again, the deca, despite not adding a lot to his lifts, like obviously it's a very potent hypertrophy compound and is good for, pure protein expression and whatnot. It's a good background anabolic and relatively very well tolerated by guys who are estrogen sensitive in general. Obviously it's hit or miss with some people, but you know what I mean? Obviously every individual, the protocol will be warranted based on the individual's needs, their side effect profile, etc., sports performance goals, whatever it is. So he ends up hitting the melanotan too. So obviously it makes him look a bit more impressive for his physique, but this is where he ends up at after just a little bit, this is a month on fucking butt fuck all tren. I guess 100 is relatively decent compared to a clinical dose realistically. Yes, the actual clinical dose used by Negma Pharmaceuticals in women. And then an 80 test. This is nothing, bro. This is a fucking pittance for most people. 180 milligrams a week. And boom. Look at this shit, bro. Look at this fucking shit. This is the result of, again, minimum effective dose. For him, he determined that this was all he needed. And just because he could have used, 500, 600, 700, he could have definitely gone up to that. But did he need to, bro? Did he fucking need to? Look at the progress that he's made in a year. This physique is fucked, bro. And this is only a year in, not even, before he's gotten exogenous hormones. So sky's the limit for this guy, and he does not need very much to make significant strides in his physique. And he's very, very responsible with his use in that he is, again, he knows he could do more. He could probably tolerate more with certain compounds too. What's stopping him from pushing the trend a bit more? What's stopping him from pushing fucking deca higher? What's stopping him from pushing the GH higher? These compounds he's tolerating fairly well right now. The test, obviously a vector that he can't seem to push too aggressively until he gets the gyno removed, which is on his to-do list from what I understand, which is good because again, you don't want to be limiting yourself to pittance doses of test simply because you have gyno and leveraging only DHT derivatives and fucking trend for the majority of your gains, obviously. Not that he's using DHT derivatives, but I'm just, giving an example. But again, do you fucking need more, bro? Look at this shit. He is goddamn peaking. This is a great, incredible progression. The guy's stacked on ridiculous amounts of lean tissue in the past year, using the most responsible, minimalistic approach fucking ever. And it works, So again, this is for me, I wanted to make this video because a lot of people don't really understand that low doses can actually work. I'm not saying you should do it. Some individuals need way more fucking shit. Some people don't respond well to this little of stuff. Some people need more. Just because there's a graded dose response study though that shows that, 600 mgs a test is like not that much more problematic than another dose of test, it doesn't mean you need to use that fucking dose. If you can get away with less to reach your goals, then what are you doing? Minimum effective dose, least stress on your heart, least stress on your fucking brain, least stress on all your organ systems, and you get to where you need. If you need more, like fuck, all you have to do is weigh out the pros and cons. Do the pros weigh out the cons? Is that enough for you to justify deploying it? Great. Some people need that. Some people need higher shit. There's a reason there's a huge disparity in the IFBB between some guys who blast their fucking faces off and some guys who get away with objectively more reasonable doses. Like again, no IFBB pro is using, like less than a gram of shit in totality, obviously, in my opinion, especially like pre-contest. But it doesn't mean that everyone's the same and everyone uses the same dose to achieve the same muscle growth outcomes. Like you'll see studies where the testosterone response, you'll have some guys who literally like barely respond to super physiological tests. Like there's outliers who literally are so fucking pitiful in their response, it's like they didn't even take anything. And then there's some guys who are like hyper aggressive outliers where they could have got away with 1/3 of the shit and had, potentially more than enough gains than they were happy with. So again, ultimately this is a personal, individualized thing and should be based upon not arbitrary numbers thrown around on forums and shit and the take your 500 mgs and shut the fuck up. This should be based upon what you need personally for your goals. Like I don't think James is worried about his HPTA being shut down using, a lower than what could have been a higher dose, given the fact that he's blasting and cruising, essentially. He is going back to replacement therapy at the end of his blast phases. If you can even call him blast when his, totality dose is like the equivalent of less than most guys' TRT. But this is what works for him. And you can't really fucking hate on the progress. You know what I mean? So anyways, I thought it was just a good example to highlight because a lot of people can't really wrap their head around this shit. They think people like this are always lying. They think there's always some like fucking games being played. Like I can say for fucking certain the guy is doing what he's saying he's doing. Okay, obviously, ultimately the guy could be lying to me too. I trust him. Obviously you can take from that what you will, but at the end of the day, there are genetic elites who are doing well with dosages that, are safer. And it doesn't mean that you need to be using a super high dose of something just because there was an arbitrary forum that said you need to use this. Rather, I think you should be assessing the minimum effective dose for your individual needs. And again, not everyone's trying to be a massive bodybuilder. Some people have sports performance related goals too. Like, is that the same fucking application? No. So do you need to be on like 600 tests necessarily? Maybe not. There's a lot of shit that can be accomplished through actually assessing your own response to things. And at the end of the day, a lot of this is experimental. Some people are like Pete Rubish. He takes fucking Anadrol and he doesn't even respond. But then he takes Superdrol or another oral. He takes Anavar and it blows Anadrol out of the water for him. That's another perfect example of a genetic elite who hyper responds to some shit, but then some shit, it's like totally useless for him. Like how many guys do you know who don't respond very well to Anadrol? Probably not very many. Most guys get instantly fucking strong when they use that shit, whereas for him, he's literally a very accomplished powerlifter with a ridiculous deadlift, very, very highly responsive to trend, to, a lot of different compounds and got, ridiculous lifts. You can go look him up on YouTube if you want. But self-admittedly, every time he used Anadrol, even from high quality sources, didn't do shit for him. Whereas he'd use another oral, even Anavar, and would blow it out of the water. So again, it doesn't just come down to you need to do what this fucking thing says you need to do because arbitrary rule applies to every single person trying to gain muscle or strength. No, you have to make guided decisions based upon what makes the most sense for you, your individual goals, and your individual response to the dose and the poison. So anyways, take from that what you will. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that one. Check out James. He is linked in the video description below. Sick physique, sick potential, Gorilla Mind athlete. Obviously, happy to promote our guys and I'm looking forward to see what he does in the future. Ridiculous fucking potential. Drop him a follow. Thank you guys for watching. Like, subscribe, check out my blog, moreplates.com. Follow me on Instagram at moreplates, Facebook, Snapchat, not VidShoot, fuck that place, Twitter, TikTok, Apple Podcasts. If you want to support the channel, you can check out anything I'm associated with in the video description below. HRT Clinic, it's all telemedicine from the comfort of your own home. My recommended lab tests and diagnostics. Stay on top of your health. Gorilla Mind, nootropic formulas, Gorilla Mode, pre-workout formulas, designed myself from scratch. recommended diet model for those who are getting into lifting and want to know the way to hit your micronutrients concurrently with your macros while being mindful of gut health, sleep hygiene, sports performance, rather than just a cookie cutter diet model from your favorite influencer on Instagram who isn't even fucking writing the shit and doesn't know anything about science and or nutrition. They just tell you to hit your macros and your fucking protein, gain muscle, bro. That's the kind of stuff you get off Instagram, off of most of these cookie cutter influencers, you know, pushing garbage. And this is a ebook designed to make it idiot proof for you to follow a healthy and a conducive diet model for hypertrophy and strength, and anything else I'm associated with. It is all in the video description below. Thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.